Welcome to the episode of Moral Injury International. And this is our last episode for for this year, the season 2025. I'm Marty here in Melbourne. Our guest, Lily, is there, and Leo.
I'm Marty.
Good
Nice to
morning,
be
Mark.
here.
Uh, I'm here in Galway in the west coast of Ireland, and there's still sunrise hasn't arrived yet. Actually, it's pitch black outside. Um, Lily, we're delighted and honored to have you here today on Moral Injury International. Just before I tell people a little bit about you, I'd just like to remind people or to tell people who for the first time might be looking at our podcast, what is moral injury? Where did it come about? Well, Marty and we met in 2021. My God, it's 5 years now. And
I used to have hair back then.
He used to. And that's another story. But we got the idea of starting this Moral Injury International because Marty and I have a similar background insofar as both of our fathers fought in the same battle in the Congo and suffered when they came back, etc. We won't go into that now. But anyway, moral injury popped up, and we discovered that apart from military, moral injury is in all walks of life. Like your story, stories of police force, hospitals, etc., etc., etc. So for the people listening for the first time, what is moral injury? Well, I'll put it in a military sense first, knowing that it goes into all walks of life. In a military sense, moral injury occurs when soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority. This is the key word, betrayal by higher authority. And in the military sense, what we've seen with veterans and our dads and so on, what happens? They become silent. They don't talk about it. They hold it inside. It eats away. It's like an injury to the soul. Maybe in later years they start talking about it, but the damage is done then. Some of them become alcoholics, broken marriages, abuse of various kinds, domestic abuse, etc., physical abuse, um, alcoholism, depression, and suicide. And in the case of Jadable, that Marty and I know about, there are at least 5 cases of suicide that we know of. Anyway, they're the kind of side effects that come from moral injury. So we're going to talk today about moral injury within your context of moral injury and how you see it. So just for people who've never heard of you, let me just run through a few things about you. And what I've got here is your bio, and you are the Chief Executive Officer of Origins Supporting People Separated by Adoption. And you're a campaigner for human rights and justice for women and children affected by the illegal adoption practices of the past. And it's not just in your country, this has happened. I know from the Irish point of view, the same thing. Your story begins in 1967, and you've probably told Marty an awful lot of this already on Life Stories with Marty. And you were taken from your bed by Queensland Police at the home you shared with your boyfriend Steve at the time. You were a month shy of your 17th birthday, and your so-called crime was that you were exposed to moral danger, despite the fact that you were over the age of consent. And at that time, you were 6 weeks pregnant. After spending a brutal night in a cell in Brisbane, you appeared before the Children's Court, and the next day, and you were sentenced to be incarcerated indefinitely in what was originally a Magdalen Asylum run by the Sisters of Mercy. The home, I think, was called Holy Cross, was attached to a commercial laundry where you were forced to work unpaid and abused by the nuns, for the nuns. When you finally went into labor, your child was taken forcibly from you while you were restrained on the labor ward bed. You were whisked away, your boy was whisked away, not to be seen. And 8 days later, you were forced to sign a consent to the crimes that so-called committed against you, and you were allowed to see your child for only 5 minutes. You were then later returned to Holy Cross, where you were incarcerated for another 6 weeks until you were sent back to your mother in New South Wales. Many years later, after a disastrous first marriage, you decided to try to find your stolen boy, your son, with only his first name to go by. named Tim, and your story that you told to Marty is amazing on this. 2.5 million names you looked at, and eventually you found Tim. And now I'm losing what's written here about you, but I'm getting it back. Sorry. So you took an action and went to the Supreme Court of Queensland in a precedent court case that failed, but that drove you on to seek justice, eventually leading to a Senate inquiry and later a national apology by the then Prime Minister. And 13 years from then, you are from that apology that you got, you are still looking for justice for an estimated 150,000 mothers in Australia that lost their newborns to a brutal and unlawful regime that has caused generations a lifetime of pain and misery. And you have told your story and your journey to this day in a book called Prisoner of the State. I hope I've done you justice with this bio. It's a very moving one, in fact. And now we'd just like, within the context of moral injury, to hear what you'd like to say about moral injury. You don't have to go into gory details or whatever you want to. Mostly we're interested in how all this experience has affected you under the umbrella of moral injury. And Marty and I will jump in from time to time to ask questions or to clarify anything. So if it's okay, Lily, privileged to have you, honored to have you, and we'd like to throw it open to you to tell us what you want.
Thank you, Leo. I think you pretty much covered my whole life there in a couple of minutes. But I didn't understand my experience, like as a 16-year-old, well, nearly 17, well, 17 and a half when I had my son. But I think I was so more or less, I won't say oppressed by being brought up a Catholic, in Catholic schools and everything else like that, and fairly naive, I suppose, in one sense. And I did have, like a troubled background because my father, he fought through the Second World War and then went on to did 5 years in Palestine. So he was pretty much a damaged man. But when we came to Australia, he was only here for 2 years and he went back, leaving my mother here with 9 children. So we had it pretty tough, for a few years until, things settled down for her and everything else like that. And he did come back and, my father did come back and wanted to resume, his relationship, his marriage, I suppose. But my mother had already moved on 5 years later. So, he ended up in jail, but he went back to England and told all of his family he survived the worst jail in Australia, in Bogger Road. It's a funny thing because, I was incarcerated somewhere near there, but anyway. But, after I had the experience, when I was in that home, it was pretty much sort of like, it's hard to say. You get used to, the situation around you. You don't understand it, and then something clicks, and then you become institutionalized. And that happened to me when I realized that no one was going to come and rescue me, even though I'd signed papers to be married, and I was waiting for my son's father to come and get me. And then it became evident that, after a short while, a couple of months or something, that he couldn't come, and nobody told me what was happening. So I think then, I think my mind sort of like snapped, I suppose, and I sort of went through my experience in that place like a zombie. It was so regulated, getting up at a certain time, going to mass in the early hours in the morning, going into the laundry and working all day, and then, doing all the praying, and then, up to the dormitory of a night time and getting locked in and all that sort of thing. So after I had that experience, they changed my name. My name was Leanne in there. But after I came out of that home, like the world was a foreign place to me. I was sent straight from Brisbane to Sydney, and back to my mother and my stepfather. So, I couldn't adjust to the outside world, like it was a foreign place after being locked up for 9 months, wasn't allowed outside the gates of Holy Cross, only when I had the baby. But, I couldn't find where I was. I was getting lost all the time. I was getting, all these people around me, and I had to go and find a job, and I couldn't work out transport. I could never find my way back home and that sort of thing. So I think during my incarceration, my mind split off. So I lived in two worlds, that of an imprisoned person and that of a person who has to try and reestablish herself as Lily MacDonald. And that's how my life sort of like began, I suppose, on the outside. And I did find that leaving the home, I felt a sense of loss. And because I'd lost a life that had been sort of like forced on me. And, the girls in the home, we formed these bonds with each other and we felt like we were family. But then when I went back to, live with my parents, some of my younger siblings had sort of like grown up in my absence. So, it was hard to adjust mentally, I suppose, to my surroundings. And I think that led me into, going into a very unsuitable marriage, because of, I suppose, the dissociation that I was having with the surroundings, particularly, I couldn't get away from my stepfather quick enough. So any escape hatch was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, over the years, I had this like scrambled, lots of memories, things would come and go and I couldn't piece things together. And I didn't know what had happened to me and I couldn't understand how it happened to me. And I read some of the letters that I wrote to the Queensland Department about trying to understand what they did to me. And I got these negative responses back. Oh, we don't have any records, this, that, and the other. And told me, what I suppose that what I had to when they took me into the home and when I was let out, and very little in between. But I did get a list of visitors that they allowed me, and that gave me an insight to the sort of people, who came. A couple of women that I work with came to visit me a couple of times, and then they allowed my older sister that was living in Brisbane, to visit me a couple of times. And sort of when I started looking at the dates and everything else, I realised that I'd been without visitors or any access to the outside world for 3 months leading into and after I lost my child. And I think that was done to make sure that I didn't have any access to anyone that was going to help me or support me. So, when you're cut off from the outside world and there's no means for you other than, to write a letter that the nuns used to read on a Sunday, we had letter writing hour, whatever. And they'd read the mail. If they didn't like it, it just went in the bin, whatever. They did the same thing with letters.
Sorry, Lily, did you just feel completely isolated?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I felt completely isolated.
Okay.
And I think that contributed to my mental health, dissociation and trauma, because you don't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen to me when I went into labour. I had no idea that what they were going to do with me. There was no inkling that I was going to lose my child, let alone, endure the torture that they inflicted on me. There was no explanation of, oh, by the way, you're going to lose your son. There was none of that. It was, a gross collusion, between the state and the nuns. They knew what was going to happen. They knew what was going to happen to me. And there wasn't a word about, what was going to happen. I thought when I had the baby, I was 17 and a half when I had him. I thought when I had the baby that they'd open the door and I could leave with him. And I was under the impression that was going to be the case, but that wasn't going to happen. And I think about it, you know, like I was still under the influence of drugs and in trauma. When they put me in in a van and took me back to the home after I'd lost him. And it was like, what the hell happened? And, you know, over the years, I've had that flashbacks of, you know, but I couldn't quite piece it all together. It was just so, you know, conflicted. And it was only when, you know, years later when I tried to find him and he put a veto on and I had a breakdown, you know, and there was threats of jailing me if I tried to find him for 2 years and or fining me $7,000 if I tried to find him. But, you know, that was at the point when my marriage broke down, was when I got the letter and, you know, threatening me. And I thought, wow, you know, you did this to me and I can't go and find out, you know, what you did with my baby. And I had a complete breakdown and I walked out of everything. I walked out of my marriage. I walked out of everything. I walked out of my life. I left everything behind. I just got in my car and left Sydney and went to Queensland and endured, you know, a couple of years up here, you know, of a terrible time that I had with people up here. There was a lot of bullying where I was working and, you know, and I had the trauma of trying to deal with it and survive, you know, like without any money. And I lost everything that I owned. And anyway, I eventually went back to Sydney after a couple of years. And that's when I took up a relationship with a friend of mine that I had for many years before I left Sydney. And we ended up getting married. And
That's Desmond.
That's it. Yeah, he was a friend of mine for about 8 years before. We used to meet every week at the club with another friend. But we ended up getting married and you know, I was working and I hurt myself and he said to me, oh, well, you better do something else, you know, go and get yourself an education. So I went to technical college and started doing a course in community welfare. And I had to go and observe a group and, you know, study group dynamics. And I thought, well, I'll join this group of mothers like myself. And then from the first phone call, when I spoke to the founder of our organisation, it started to click what they'd done to me. And then, you know, during the whole course of the study that I was doing, I started digging into things and, you know, every unit that I did of something led me on to investigate what the crimes that had been committed against me. Then, of course, when I did that, you know, I started looking for my son. And when I realised, you know, they'd broken every law in the book, I thought I was out for, well, I could say that I was out for revenge, but no, that wouldn't be very nice. I'd say
Justice,
I was out for justice.
Yeah.
But that's when everything started to come together, and you know, unearthing all the corruption that was going on, you know, in the state of what they were doing to people like me. It was just horrendous.
And do you see, sorry, Lily, just a bit, I want to bring Leo in there, is because everything you're saying is kind of what Leo said at the start, as in moral injury. I mean, I know you've only understood this term, and I've been privileged to get to know you. We've had many chats, as we said, but do you find that? I want to bring Leo in here to finish off that question for me, Leo.
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but a couple of things pop up here for me, Lily, listening to you. And I did watch your original life story with Marty. This sense of betrayal comes across very strong, you know, betrayal by higher authorities. And it's something that we've seen with lots of our people that we interview on podcasts, etc. Betrayal is a common trend throughout the whole thing. Would you use one word there that resonates with me? Isolation. You felt isolation. And isolation, then it triggers in my mind, isolation of the mind. You're isolated within yourself. And I bet, Marty, I don't think we've ever used this expression in all our talks about moral injuries. So that's what I'm getting out of your chat with us so far. I can see my own dad. I can see other people. They were isolated within their mind. Within themselves, they suffered isolation. And wow, I'm getting a little bit of shiver just now realizing what veterans of Jadaville that we're involved with must have suffered, the isolation factor. And I thank you for that. Okay, anyway, please continue.
Yeah, sorry. And also isolation, but also the shame part of it. And obviously your first husband, it didn't work out very well. And again, what you're doing, but your strength is amazing. You come through the other end. But I want you to continue. I don't want to lose it here. Continue with your story because I know the audience are listening and they want me to be quiet for a minute. Okay.
I think what really affected me most was when I went into that place. I was Lily MacDonald. I'd been working for 3 years and I knew who I was and where I fit. I was brought up a Catholic. We went to Catholic schools. We believed in God. We smelt the incense and everything else like that in Mass. And then, like it's being put into somewhere where you can't object, you can't complain, you can't run away because they put you somewhere worse. You've got to comply with everything that they do and everything that they say. And then, you wonder why you're in that position. You think there's a lifeline somewhere, but there isn't. And you lose your sense of identity and you can't yell out about it. You can't scream, I'm not Leanne, I'm Lily MacDonald, and I think that, like, when I came out of that place, that instance of what and who I was while I was in there, incarcerated, still was sort of like half of me. I had half of an identity that I had to conform with, with outside of the place and be Lily MacDonald again. But I was still basically, my mind was still imprisoned in the trauma that I couldn't get out or away from. And that lingered with me for many, many years, and I never really broke free of that oppression, but I think when you look
Sorry, Lily, just for this, you lost your personal identity.
I lost my sense of, I lost my identity.
Your personal, with your space, your personal identity, and as we move on, when you got it back. But sorry, carry on. I just want to throw that in there.
I don't think I ever quite got it back because you've still got that trauma there that's, that's at the back of your mind. It's like a videotape rewinding all the time, and anything would remind you, even the smell of soap powder, or a song or something like that. And you'd get this, you'd get jerked back to that place where you're imprisoned. But the thing was, is when I started to discover, and what they did to me and a little bit at a time and everything else. But I think the thing was, what disturbed me the most, I suppose, over all these years was that, the connection between the state and the church. And I can't really deal with that. That the state put me into a place where they were going to use me, and use my labor and, control me and take my identity off me. And why the state would put me into that position as a ward of the state, to do what they did to me, like they allowed them to enslave me, to force me to work, to change my name, to take everything away from me, including my child. And it takes an awful lot of unwinding to get to somewhere where you can understand what they did to you. And it took me many, many years, like to try and equate. But I think what damaged me the most was it took away any sort of, I suppose, sense of religion or faith or whatever you want to call it, because these people were acting, like in a moral sort of a way. But what they were doing were they were betraying. They were betraying the people who believed in, a moral civilization or society. And I think that's what they took away from me, so I became indifferent to, any sort of a faith that there was something good in the world. And I think that was one of the most important things in my life, that the only religion or truth or anything else that I can get my head around is truth. If people are not honest with me, then, I know that they're going to hurt me somewhere along the line. But I was brought up in faith. We went to schools, we were taught, this is what you do, but when you look at the system itself, you think the system itself was, bankrupt without any morals at all. But they're inflicting their morality onto you, and then you find out that it's all lies. It's coercion, collusion with the state to take young women, and put them into these places and use them and for everything that they've got, even their child, and then throw them out, as if they didn't matter. And the woman in my court case, the social worker in my court case, when she was asked, what do you do with girls like Lily? She said, we just put them in the too hard basket. Well, that was where my life was for many, many years, in the too hard basket, because people didn't know how to deal with me. And this is the thing, even to this day, where they know, with all these apologies and everything else that they've done and blah, 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 they still don't get it. They still do not get the fact that, they committed all these atrocities and crimes against people like me that couldn't defend themselves against. But there's no true contrition there. It's absolutely, they do their best to try and, fob you off or silence you or treat you with indifference or contempt or whatever. And even today, I still get that, for speaking up. They treat you like that, and as if they don't have any responsibility for it. The system doesn't have any responsibility for it. A system of organisations that profited and become, multi-billion-dollar corporations, pretending that they're religious organisations.
It's like Lily is they try to silence you, which also then try to shame you, which is part of Moral Injury International. And then you go silent for a while, as you were just alluding to there. You go silent for a while, and then you found your voice after, because I can't imagine what you went through, And as I say, I think you're one of the bravest women I've ever met. But what you went through, and then to find yourself, but they do. That's part of it, to put you down. But sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on, please.
Well, that's all right.
Can I interrupt, Billy, if I may?
Yes.
Lest I forget it later. You're saying a few things there that are really giving me the shivers, because something else, you're validating everything that Marty and I have been hearing from other people as well, in other countries, not just Australia. But you talked about being imprisoned in your trauma.
Yes.
It's a wonderful expression, imprisoned within your own self, your own trauma that and other people outside won't even see it. In the street, people you'll meet, maybe in a pub or in a restaurant, they won't see that. You also talked about the connection between state and church. Well, we have exactly the same thing here. We have it in other countries. We're hearing it, and not just with the church, but state and other organizations like prison services, medical services, hospitals, army, etc., etc. And that connection is what destroys people like you and I and Marty. Okay, you mentioned other things there that triggered off things in my mind. The system, not just in Australia but elsewhere, in this kind of scenario, they're morally bankrupt.
Yes.
Totally morally bankrupt. No moral integrity, no moral compass at all, and it boils down to no humanity. And this is coming across from your story, and we've heard it ourselves, and we know it ourselves, and we've heard it from many, many other people over the last 5 years. So you're validating everything we've been saying, and thank you for that. And please continue.
Well, I think, after I sort of started putting things together and I decided I was going to sue the state of Queensland because I was a ward. They were my guardians, and yet they did that to me. But I mean, it was the most brutal thing, when they handed down their decision and wrote in its judgment, which is still up there on the internet, making me look like some sort of nutcase, that had delusional ideas. There was a baby sealing racket going on. Well, we dispelled that. Like years later when we got a national apology and they had to admit the crimes that they're committing. But the thing is, it still hangs there, like law students. I stopped doing law when I realised that I may have to, study my own court case, about fiduciary duty, the duty that the state owed its wards, rather. And, that was a betrayal not only by, everybody that was involved in at the time, what they did to me, but also the cover-up. And, the dodging of taking responsibility for the crimes that they committed.
The cover-up. A very good question. Very good answer there. The cover-up is part of it. Anyway, sorry, Lily. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I knew, I was warned that I was going to go down big time because my court case would have set the precedent for the stolen generations and the forgotten Australians, children that were brought up in homes and orphanages. So, I had to go down big time, and discredit me and make me look like I was a raving lunatic, in that judgment. That deserved, they never took the blame for anything they did to me while they had me incarcerated. They never took the blame for that. They took the blame, they put the blame on my father, who was a damaged man that I hadn't seen or heard from since I was the age of 11. And, and my son's father who wanted to marry me, and myself, for being whatever, I don't know. I suppose you morally, corrupt, whatever, Anyway, it was easier to get rid of somebody like me because I was holding them to account. But the thing was, and even today, after all the apologies and everything else that we've had and, inquiries, whatever, everything they've done, they still will not take responsibility and accountability for the crimes that they committed, not only to me, but now I'm a great grandmother. So I see that damage and that, what they've done to going into a fourth generation of my family.
Transgenerational.
Yes. And the thing is, they well and truly screwed my son over when he found out at the age of 23 that everything that he'd been told or done to him was a pack of lies. Based on, covering up the crime that they committed. These people lived directly across the road from where I was imprisoned. I could look out at their house, from the bedroom window. So, they had 2 children from there. So, hello, how close does a person have to be, to see what was going on? This woman, these people may have been on the other side of the petition going to mass while I was sitting there forced to pray, to the Virgin Mary. And anyway, and it's sort of like, it's something that particularly when you're doing family history, when you realise, I know who I am. I know my sense of identity, but to be taking that away from every future generation that they've stolen children from, it goes beyond anything that you could possibly do to a person and their sense of self. And if people don't get angry about that by robbing a person of everything, stripping them of their faith, their culture, their language, their family. They stole everything away from our children and recreated them with a pack of lies. And we know now the damage that they caused all these people, by doing that. We have generations now of lost people that can't connect back to who they are and where they come from. And that is unforgivable. What they're doing and what they've done is basically isolating every individual that they've stripped everything away from. but they never stripped away my son's soul, because he, I suppose in some sense, realizes that he belongs to me, but on the physical and the mental can't accept that or deal with it. And that's what they've done to our children. You know, they've got that initial trauma that from when they were separated, and left to scream their lungs out for days, if not weeks on end, in these hospital nurseries, until some beggar come along and attach with them to make them feel safe again. But they never do. But that's what they did to our children.
Lily, may I ask a question? Based on the fact that you got an apology from the Prime Minister, Julia, I hope I pronounced her second name right, Gillard or Gillard?
Yeah.
Gillard.
Yeah, I hope that things have improved, or have they improved from the state point of view, in your opinion?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I haven't retired yet. I haven't retired. I'm still fighting, and I blame that. I blame that on my father, the Irish, and you know, never bow down to any man. That's one thing that I remember from him. And the thing is, my mother was a Jew, and she was persistent at everything that she did. So, you know, I'm an Irish Jew, or not an Irish stew, but an Irish Jew. But anyway, the thing is, no, they haven't been the slightest bit accountable. You can say as many sorries as you can say Hail Marys, but it still doesn't get you closer to where you should be, you know, in actually being sincere about what you're doing. And they haven't been sincere about what they're doing. They're still trying to shut us up, in particular people like me.
All right, that brings me to something. We had a very, very fine interview with another lady in Australia, Bernadette Boss, some months back, and she maintained that, and this brings me to a question, she maintained that at higher level, government level, I presume, I don't know enough about Australia, state level or whatever, there can be one person in an organization that just shuts the door in your face when you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So my question is, could there be a situation where the state or the organization might be trying to make changes, but one person can stop it because one person has a particular idea? Or is it more than just one person in your case? Is it the entire organization, the entire State Department or government department or whatever?
Well, the thing is, I suppose I've been political for a long period of time, and the person that you go to is the minister that oversees these sorts of things. So, you know, you expect them to speak up on your behalf. You voted for them in the first place. But the thing is though, they will always protect the government, you know, when it comes to, you know, like being accountable. I mean, nobody's ever been charged with what they did to me. And I had a police investigation going for 2 or 3 years, and they couldn't really pinpoint the crime down to any one particular person. It was right across the board. So the thing is, you know, like with, you know, as far as redress or accountability or anything else like that, it's a case of, oh, well, it's too hard for me, you know, the minister. It's too hard. It's too political. It might cost too much, you know, and everything else. So let's just keep quiet about it. We won't talk to them. And I've had letters from the minister when I've asked for a meeting. Oh no, we won't meet with you, but we're only going to meet with this stakeholders group. So okay, we're on the stakeholders group. So what do? They kick you off. So you don't get into the stakeholders group. So you don't have a voice. And this is what they do to people. They shut you up. They shut you up. They ignore you. They shut the door on you. They turn their back on you. They treat you like an imbecile. They look for anything that can discredit you. So that's how they treat you. They haven't been one bit sincere. And I've had 4 apologies so far. It might be more, but I think I've lost count of them, of how sorry they are and everything else like that. But there's no tangible means of accountability or redress. Now we've said sorry. You can go away now. The crimes are finished. You know, it doesn't matter that your child and your grandchildren are still stolen, and you know they don't know, you know, what's going to happen, you know, in the future. Blah blah blah. Your whole history, everything, you know, is gone. It's finished because you know they legally belong to these strangers. So the
Yes,
crime is too big. The crime is too big for them to fix it. And, they won't fix it because they think it's going to cost them money. And this is what it all comes down to. It all comes down to money.
Yep.
They do not want to, what they do is they circumvent the law. They circumvent our common law to get around, giving victims of crime like myself any form of legal redress. So they circumvent the law by saying, oh, now we're really sorry now. Now you can bugger off, don't annoy us again. You got what you asked for. You got your apology, but I'm a victim of crime, every other victim of crime and negligence gets some sort of redress. Why not me? You've left lifelong damage to me, not only physical but mental. Aren't I entitled to justice? Or no, because you're too difficult. You're in the too hard basket and we can't pull you out of it. So
I'm laughing a little bit.
I can see Leo, and I know what Leo's thinking. I'm the same.
Everything you're saying is what other people have said to us. Everything you're saying is what we are experiencing as well in this part of the world. Laughing at us, you're imbeciles, keep away, you've got your apology, you've got this, you've got that, enough's done, don't be making a nuisance of yourself, and so on. Slamming doors in your face all the time. And what we find, the only thing that works is by getting the media, getting like-minded people like us gathering together and just making waves until they sit up and take notice, which is what you've been doing for years.
And just for our listeners there all over the world, is Leo's talking about the Siege of Jarraville that both their dads was in. You can watch that on Netflix. That's what he's referring to. And that's where you can understand with Lily. It seems to be the same pattern. Bury it. Hopefully, like even the Jarraville, hopefully you'll just die or go away. Just what you said. Just, sorry, now move out of the way.
Yeah. And they're worried about the money end of it, which hasn't arisen in our situation. But, I understand where you're coming from. You're ticking all the boxes in my mind, Lily. Sad boxes, unfortunately. So, you talked about you're trying to get revenge and so on. None of us, I think, are trying to get revenge, really. We're just trying, as you said,
justice.
To get justice, to get the story out there, to get a bit of justice. Because Marty mentioned, you mentioned, the transgenerational effect is another shocking part of it, where you have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who have suffered. We all, apart from moral injury and everything, we've all come across people who, let's say, might have been adopted or something or whatever, and problems that brought, looking for the mother, looking for the father, in reverse of what you're doing, looking for Tim, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of trauma there, an awful lot of upset, and it's transgenerational.
It is transgenerational, but it also affects the people that are around you today. Your husbands, your wives, your brothers, your sisters, the whole extended family. If you count how many people are immediately around that person that's affected, it's dozens of people. I had, 8 siblings, and then, they had husbands, and my son missed out on having nieces, nephews, sisters, brothers, all that, a whole group of people that, could have been in his life, and he's got to try and adjust to and trying to, I suppose, feel that he's got some connection to them. And, and it's the same with his children, and you think to yourself, well, that should never have happened. In particular, they left me with a lifetime of grief, with the loss of my son's father. And, I suppose I've had to learn to get over that in lots of ways. But I mean, it's something that you could never resolve. It takes you 50 odd years down the track to see the damage that was done to all of us, even the family that he went on to have, they are still affected by, like what happened to him way back when. And, they've discovered a brother that they never knew that they ever had. And they're trying to, connect with him as well. So it's just not on my side of the fence. It's also on his side of the fence. My son's father was from the Ukraine. So when you think about, and I ponder about this with all the stuff that's going on with the Jews, I came from a group of people that were persecuted on every side. My Irish father, that the Irish were looked down upon and considered to be less than what people expect out of a human being. And then you have the Ukrainians that going through what they're going through now, and the Jews as well. So I'm a mixture of all those cultures and people. I can't wash that DNA out of my body. It's who I am and what makes me who I am today.
And Lily, you just said very important. You said there about how it affected you just in your circle, and there's 8 siblings. So if you multiply that affects 100 people. And Leo and myself have worked out just with Jaredville from the 155 men that came back out of offsprings and everything. There's nearly 10,000 of them. And when you're talking about the women that the stolen children, you multiply that. That's where you triggered in my head, just saying that.
Yep. People don't have the idea about, the extent and the effect that what they did to us has on, every future generation. And I think, when I talk to people about it, they're incredulous, that this sort of thing went on in a supposedly a civilized country, particularly when it happens in places where you go to, I suppose, to to have people save your life. You put your trust in them that they're going to look after you. And when you think about, a well-oiled machine that, strips young women that go into hospital, of their legal rights and drugs them and ties them down and steals their baby off them and hides them in the hospital, I didn't have any idea. And I think the general public in those days were lied and deceived to, that, that their children or their daughters or whatever, their grandchildren, were going to be looked after. Instead, they got a whole, report of, oh, well, this is what she decided, blah, 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 when they made young women sign off on their crimes and then hid them under legislation. So we would never find out what they did to us. So, when you think about that, the evil intent behind it, to be hiding the evidence of what they were doing and then pretending that we all willingly gave away our children to strangers, you can't even think of anything more evil than that.
Well, Lily, I'd say it is, and we Leon knows what I'm talking about there, but it's a word we've used quite a bit. There was no duty of care. And for the people that did that, they wanted to sweep that under the carpet. It's not that they didn't give you a duty of care. They said it's your fault.
That's right. You were immoral. You got yourself into that predicament. But if you look at the history, and I've dealt with an awful lot of mothers over the years, hundreds of them, and not every one of them was lustful or whatever, promiscuous. A lot of them were still innocent teenagers that didn't have any sex education. A lot of them, and I can say this with confidence, a lot of them were raped, by people that they thought were safe. A lot of them were groomed, by married men or whatever. So, it wasn't a crime that solely belonged, or what they thought belonged, to young women who were promiscuous and got themselves into trouble. This was, like a society where, ignorance, I suppose, by young and naive women that weren't taught anything about sex education were exploited by, and whatever. by, men that never, ever were held accountable for those 150,000 babies. There was an awful lot of men, that did want to marry, but there's an awful lot of men that ran. So, they didn't carry the stigma of being men that willingly gave up their babies, or men that, took advantage of young women. They never bore the stigma. They went on to marry decent women and have children, or not having children, so they could claim our children, the ones that some of them created. But, you think about that. This was not a crime that men were ever held accountable for, along with, the society of people that carried out the plan of getting these children into homes where people couldn't have them. And they're still trying to do it today. So there's no difference today. Still trying to make up families of people.
It's not just the men. It can be people that the people that knew what was going on but didn't speak out either. They're just as guilty.
Of course they are.
Now, listen, we've got to wrap up the show, and I'm going to pass over to Leo to finish up. I'm sorry, you know what I'm like. We've had many conversations. I could talk all day, but I do have a schedule. So,
of course
Leo.
You
do. As I said, I've got goose pimples listening to you, Lily. You've had an amazing story. You're an amazing lady. One question that pops into my mind is, how are you now?
How am I now?
Yeah.
I'm.
Good question.
You're still fighting.
I feel that I've done whatever I could. I mean, yeah. I didn't go out on this expedition, to be some sort of a hero or anything else like that. I went on to do what I did because I was a mother that lost a child, and I didn't know what had been done to me. And every discovery, made me, more informed about how wicked the system and everything else was. But how am I now? Well, I suppose in one sense, I'm a very lonely woman. And, you think about it, regardless of all the people that are around you that, want to love you, you can't have that sense of trust with anyone anymore. And, you're more or less, I suppose, stepped back away from your own children, your own grandchildren, because you don't know, how to love them because it wasn't shown to you. And I think the worst part is the aloneness of many women like myself that are living on their own, wallowing in what has been done to them. And there's no escape for them. At least the escape for me was finding out what they did to me and speaking up about it.
Okay. Wow.
Again, right.
Yeah. I mean, that's very powerful and sad. But if I can say that, don't be lonely all that much, because you've got Marty and myself now that be thinking about you a lot. And when thousands and thousands, and maybe a few million people will be watching this podcast, they'll all be on your side. You can be sure of it. So that loneliness, something comes back to you, hopefully, will take away the loneliness, and certainly you're going to get good vibes, some good energy sent to you from millions and millions of people as a result of this podcast. And for me, just to finish, Lily, may I thank you very, very much for talking to us like this. You're an amazing lady, and your story is amazing. And we've been honored and privileged to have you share this with us. And I wish you the very, very best from here on. And you take care of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. And thanks to Marty, for listening to me babbling on, I suppose. But anyway, I do appreciate it.
I think, Lily, both of us have many conversations. I've been honored to get to know you. And as I said, you can't tell all the stuff I told you, and you can't, and I won't tell all the stuff, but you are a champion. And you know what? As we would say, we were talking about moral injury was the basic thing, and everything you ticked all the boxes, as Leo said. But you know what? I believe you've come to your end. And if I may just finish off and say that I know you're fighting another battle with your husband, Desmond, who's going through cancer, and I would like to shout out to him also for this episode and say you're just an amazing woman. Love what you're doing, and you do have friends, not just us. You have plenty of people out there listening, and I would recommend, we're just showing at the end here, your book. I would recommend the best Christmas and New Year's present for anyone just to read it. Your honesty and everything.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate talking to you and Leo. It's just giving, a bit more of a voice to people like myself. And I hope that, they stand up and speak their truth like I've done. And I wish them well. I hope everybody has a peaceful Christmas. I hope to have one as well. But many thanks for, inviting me on to your program. And I look forward to keeping in touch. And
absolutely. You can't get rid of us now. But Lily, thank you so much. And wishing you and all our audience here in Australia and all over the world, this is a final episode, and I couldn't finish a moral injury with our lovely guest, Lily. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. Leo, thank you as always.
Okay, Marty.
I might get over to Ireland shortly.
Well, you can go. Leo he's got his art gallery there. No better man to get in contact.
Well, I'll make sure if I get over there, I'm going to look him up. I'm going to find a way to Tipperary.
No. I'm in Galway.
I might even go there as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lily.
All right, guys. Thank you to our audience here. And go to moralinjuryinternational.com. And you can also go on Life Stories with Marty on our YouTube. Follow the links. And we'll see you on the next episode in 2026. Thank you, guys. And good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.